For 10 long years, a small town searched for answers about a missing boy, until a loyal dog entered an old, forgotten chicken coop and uncovered something that would shock everyone to their core. What he found didn't just solve a mystery, it exposed a chilling secret buried beneath layers of lies. This is a story of instinct, heartbreak, and a truth that refused to stay hidden. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life mysteries, powerful rescues, and unforgettable moments that prove even the smallest clues can change everything. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a story that just might restore your faith in justice and in dogs like Scout. It had been a decade since the townsfolk of Elmridge last heard anything about the Parker family farm. Once a lively place bustling with laughter, barking dogs, and clucking hens, it had grown silent and still ever since tragedy struck. 10 years ago, young Daniel Parker, only 12 at the time, vanished without a trace. One autumn morning, he went out to feed the chickens, and he never came back. His boots were found near the old coop, but that was the only clue. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Drones, dogs, and divers scoured every inch of the surrounding forest, rivers, and fields. But the boy had seemingly disappeared into thin air. The disappearance rocked the town and devastated the family. Eventually, the Parkers moved away, unable to live with the silence that haunted every corner of their property. The farm was left to rot, reclaimed by overgrowth and shadow. In the present day, Sheriff Evelyn Ross, now in her mid-40s, had long since filed the Parker case away under unsolved, though she never truly let it go. It was her first major case as sheriff, and the one that left the deepest scar. Occasionally, she'd drive past the broken fence and rusting mailbox on County Road 16, wondering what had gone wrong. But life moved on, and so did the town, until one unassuming Tuesday morning, a call came in from a man named Frank Delaney. Frank was a retired firefighter and had recently purchased the Parker farm with plans to renovate it. He had always admired the property from afar and wanted to restore its old charm. Frank was also the proud owner of a German Shepherd named Scout, a trained rescue dog he had worked with during his service. Scout was loyal, alert, and had a nose that could sniff out a buried key under 6 inches of concrete. As Frank worked on clearing out the barns and repairing fences, Scout roamed freely, often sniffing through the collapsed coops and rotting sheds with the tireless focus of a dog on a mission. That morning, Frank had noticed Scout acting strangely. The dog had wandered over to the oldest chicken coop, the one furthest from the house, partially hidden by overgrown blackberry bushes and ivy. Scout stood there stiffly, nose twitching, tail held high. Then he began to dig. Not the playful kind of digging, but sharp, deliberate pawing, growling low as he unearthed the dirt under the coop's corner. Frank tried calling him off at first, thinking it was just a squirrel or a buried bone. But Scout wouldn't stop. He barked, then looked back at Frank urgently, then barked again. That's when Frank saw it, something hard and metal glinting under the loose soil. Sheriff Ross arrived within the hour. She hadn't been out to the Parker property in years, and stepping back onto that soil sent a chill down her spine. The memories came flooding in, Daniel's mother sobbing, the endless interviews, the hopelessness in the eyes of the search volunteers. Frank led her to the coop, now partially dug up. A team had been called in to excavate carefully, and what they uncovered stunned everyone, a small rusted tin box, long sealed shut, its hinges corroded. Inside were water-damaged but legible drawings, childlike sketches signed with Danny. There was a plastic flashlight, now cracked and dead, and an old baseball card, also bearing Daniel's name in faded black marker. But that wasn't all. Scout hadn't stopped there. Just behind the coop's wall, nestled deep under tangled roots, he unearthed something much more chilling, a bundle of cloth, tightly wrapped in what used to be a flannel jacket. Inside was a skeletal hand, still clutching a wooden toy truck. Sheriff Ross stood frozen. Her knees went weak. She recognized the toy. She remembered Daniel's father showing it to the media during a press conference 10 years ago. It had been a gift for his birthday. The hand, the jacket, the toy, it all pointed to one heartbreaking truth. But how could this be? The area had been searched multiple times. Cadaver dogs had sniffed the whole farm. How had this spot gone unnoticed for a decade? Sheriff Ross ordered a full forensic examination and began combing through the original case file. Something wasn't adding up. The Coop had clearly collapsed more recently than 10 years ago. It looked like it had been reinforced or rebuilt at some point. But by whom? And why? Frank, still shaken, told her he had found evidence someone had lived on the property recently. Empty food cans, discarded blankets, and even cigarette butts were scattered in the barn. It looked like someone had been squatting there, perhaps for years. Could they have known about the body? Covered it up? Or were they connected to Daniel's death? Scout remained near the dig site, tail low, ears twitching as if he could still hear echoes of the past. Sheriff Ross knelt beside him, scratching his ears gently. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You found him." Her mind reeled. This wasn't just closure, it was a question mark blowing wide open. The news spread through Elmridge like wildfire. After 10 long years, Daniel Parker had been found. But no one was prepared for the secrets that would follow. Because what Scout had sniffed out in the dirt wasn't just a boy's final resting place, it was the opening clue to something far more sinister. And Sheriff Ross knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The discovery of Daniel Parker's remains shook the small town of Elmridge to its core. Sheriff Evelyn Ross spent the next 48 hours immersed in a blur of forensic reports, interviews, and long-forgotten case files. The forensic team confirmed that the remains matched Daniel's dental records. Cause of death? Still undetermined. There were no visible signs of trauma on the bones, but decomposition and time had erased much of the evidence. However, there was one shocking detail. Tiny scratches on the inner side of the rusted tin box Daniel's belongings had been found in. It looked like a child had been trying to claw his way out. Sheriff Ross couldn't sleep that night. The thought that Daniel might have still been alive, trapped in some makeshift underground chamber, gnawed at her like a cold wind through cracked glass. The next morning, she returned to the Parker property. The sun was just rising, casting long orange shadows over the crumbling farmhouse. Scout was already there with Frank, circling the edges of the coop like he was still searching for something. Frank greeted her with a grim expression and handed her a muddy object wrapped in a plastic bag. "Found this behind the barn," he said. Inside was an old Polaroid photo, faded, water-damaged, but still clear enough to make out two faces. One was Daniel, unmistakably young, smiling, holding up his toy truck. The second figure, standing behind him, was a man. His face was partially turned away, blurred by movement, but Ross's stomach dropped. Something about that silhouette was eerily familiar. She returned to the station and dug through the interview logs from 10 years prior. Most of the focus back then had been on potential kidnappers from outside the area, traveling offenders, or drifters. But buried deep in the file, she found a name she hadn't thought about in years: Royce Tiller. He was a handyman who had done odd jobs on the Parker farm just before Daniel's disappearance. Back then, he had seemed like just another down-on-his-luck worker. He'd been questioned and released. No evidence tied him to anything. But now, with that photograph, Royce's name glowed red in her memory. Sheriff Ross paid a visit to the county clerk's office and discovered something startling. Royce Tiller still lived just outside Elmridge, deep in the woods, off a winding gravel path that didn't appear on most GPS maps. He had no internet, no phone, and rarely came into town. The only reason they knew he was still around was because he occasionally showed up to collect mail or barter tools at the farmer's market. It was as if he had gone invisible. Ross didn't wait. She gathered Deputy Harland and 2 other officers and headed toward Tiller's cabin that afternoon. Scout rode along with Frank in his truck, following behind. As they got closer, Ross could feel something shifting in the air. The trees seemed too still, the silence too heavy. The cabin emerged from the forest like a wound, leaning slightly, covered in moss, its windows dark. An old pickup truck sat half-sunken in the mud nearby, tires flat, rust chewing its metal like disease. They knocked. No answer. Ross signaled to her team, and they approached with caution. The door was unlocked, creaking open with a shrill groan. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood, rotting food, and something else, something faintly metallic and sour. Scout immediately pulled free of Frank's grip and began sniffing the corners, pacing like he recognized the scent from the coop. Inside the cabin, they found signs of habitation. Empty food tins, threadbare blankets, even a recent newspaper. But what chilled them most was the back room, a dark, padlocked door behind a tattered curtain. Ross ordered it opened. Inside was a windowless room with a single wooden chair, leather straps bolted to its arms, and a broken camera on a tripod pointed directly at it. Along the wall were crude drawings, some of forests, others of a boy. A boy with a toy truck. The room screamed captivity. "I think he kept him here," Deputy Harland whispered. "I think Daniel was brought here after he disappeared." But if that was true, why had Daniel's body been found back at the farm? Had he escaped? Had someone moved him later? Scout began barking furiously, scratching at the floor in the corner of the room. Ross rushed over. There, under a loose floorboard, they found a notebook, its pages stained, torn, some illegible. But one phrase stood out again and again in shaky handwriting. He said, "I can go home now." Another page, "He took me back when I ran." And another, "He watches me through the cracks." Ross's hands shook as she turned each page. The entries were erratic, disjointed, a child's frightened stream of thought. But they told a clear story. Daniel had been held captive in that very room, kept alive for an unknown amount of time. Then something changed. Something let him go, or tried to. Suddenly, Scout barked louder than ever. He had run outside, past the cabin, and was standing at the edge of the woods, his fur bristling. Sheriff Ross followed, and that's when she saw movement, a man, tall, thin, bearded, darting between trees. "Royce Tiller," she shouted. "Stop right there." But the man kept running. Ross and her team gave chase, Scout tearing ahead with wild purpose, nose locked on the scent. They followed him deep into the woods, through thickets and over creeks, until they came upon an old hunting shack nearly swallowed by vines. The door was ajar. Inside, the man stood still, breathing heavily, hands raised. Royce Tiller looked older, more gaunt than she remembered, but his eyes still carried that eerie, distant glint. "I didn't kill him," he said softly. "He wanted to go back. He begged me." Ross approached cautiously. "You kept him, Royce. You took a child. You hid him from the world. Why?" Tiller shook his head. "He was never supposed to die. I fed him. I kept him safe. The world was too loud for him. You took away his life. I gave him peace." Ross cuffed him without another word. Scout growled low but stayed back. As they walked him out of the shack, Royce said one last thing that sent chills through Ross's spine: "There's more you don't know. Daniel wasn't the first." Back at the station, as the sun dipped behind the hills of Elmridge, Sheriff Ross stared at the evidence room in silence. The mystery that Scout had unearthed was no longer just about Daniel Parker. It was something bigger. Something darker. And it had been hiding in plain sight for years. The town of Elmridge was no stranger to secrets, but no one had imagined that a 10-year-old mystery would be unraveled not by a detective, but by a dog. As Sheriff Evelyn Ross sat across from Royce Tiller in the interrogation room, the air was heavy with tension. The man hadn't spoken since his chilling confession. Daniel wasn't the first. The words rang in her ears, relentless and cruel. Ross leaned forward, eyes sharp. "What do you mean he wasn't the first, Royce? Who else?" Tiller gave a tired smile, almost wistful, and said, "I didn't want to hurt them. I wanted to protect them." His voice was soft, as if he believed what he said was righteous. Ross pressed harder, but Tiller just stared at the one-way glass, lost in some private, deranged world. That night, with Tiller locked away, Ross and her team launched a full reinvestigation into missing persons reports within a 50-mile radius over the last 2 decades. What they found sent a collective chill through the department: 3 other boys, all aged between 8 and 12, had disappeared over the last 15 years, all from small nearby towns. None were ever found. All were quiet, artistic, or described by their families as different. The last one, Jacob Riley, vanished 7 years ago, 3 years before Daniel. Back at the Parker property, Frank and Scout returned to the site, now cordoned off with police tape and tents. Scout had become restless, pacing, barking at the same grove of trees behind the barn every time he passed. Frank trusted the dog's instincts, and after alerting Ross, a forensic dig team was dispatched. Hours into the excavation, they found what no one wanted to believe. Beneath the shallow earth, wrapped in tarpaulin layers of plastic, were the skeletal remains of 2 young boys. They weren't buried deep, only hidden well, just enough to escape previous searches. Personal items confirmed what Ross feared. One body was wearing a necklace inscribed with the name Jacob. The second was too deteriorated for immediate identification, but it fit the timeline. Royce Tiller had been a predator, hiding in plain sight, burying his crimes beneath layers of kindness and labor. Sheriff Ross felt rage swell inside her, rage for the families who had no answers for years, rage for the children who never came home, and rage for the boy who was so close to being saved. Daniel had survived longer than the others. His drawings, his notes, they painted a picture of a boy trying to stay sane in the grip of a madman. Tiller hadn't just kidnapped him, he played games with him. Told him the world outside was cruel. Made him believe his family had forgotten him. But something in Daniel had resisted. Perhaps he remembered the sound of his mother's voice, or the way his father used to toss him a baseball on summer evenings. Whatever it was, Daniel fought to escape. Ross believed that with every scrap of her being. When she returned to the cabin with a search warrant in hand, her goal was clear: find every piece of evidence that tied Tiller to the other missing children. The cabin gave up more secrets. Under floorboards and behind false walls, Ross and her team found sketches, photos, and a notebook detailing Royce's twisted philosophy. He believed he was saving boys from a corrupt world. He wrote about quiet minds and pure hearts, about giving them peace. Pages of madness, scribbled with childlike stick figures and cryptic phrases. They whisper to me in the dark. The coop is where the truth sleeps. Ross felt sick. This wasn't just a man losing touch. This was evil hiding under the mask of gentleness. Back in town, the families of the missing children were notified. Tears fell. Old wounds tore open. But amid the sorrow was a grim kind of peace. After years of uncertainty, they finally had answers. The townspeople of Elmridge, once content to bury the past, now rallied around the victims' families. A memorial was planned. Flowers piled up outside the sheriff's station. And through it all, Scout remained close by Ross's side, quiet, vigilant, and alert, as if still guarding the spirit of the boy who had once clutched a wooden truck and smiled for a Polaroid. The final breakthrough came a week later. A DNA match confirmed the second set of remains found behind the barn belonged to Samuel Wright, a boy reported missing from a nearby county in 2011. 3 boys. 1 monster. But the story wasn't quite over. One night, while reviewing the evidence logs, Ross came across a torn piece of cloth found in the coop. Stitched into the hem were initials, Del T. These didn't match any of the known victims. She froze. Another boy? Another life stolen? Or someone else entirely? That thread led Ross to uncover the case of Lucas Teller, a boy who vanished over 20 years ago in a neighboring state. He'd been a foster child placed in the same home Royce Tiller had lived in as a teen. Police records showed abuse allegations, but nothing was ever proven. Ross couldn't say for certain if Lucas had been Tiller's first victim, but the implications were clear. This had started long before Daniel Parker. At the courthouse weeks later, Royce Tiller sat stone-faced as charges were read. The courtroom was packed. Families, friends, reporters. When Sheriff Ross took the stand, she spoke not just as a law enforcement officer, but as a mother, a protector, a witness to the resilience of a small boy who never gave up. Daniel Parker, she said, her voice cracking, may have died in that coop, but it was his will to live and the instincts of one good dog that brought the truth into the light. Scout, now a local hero, was honored by the town. A statue of him was placed near the memorial garden built in Daniel's memory. Children would come to touch the bronze dog's nose and whisper thank yous. Frank, too, was recognized, though he remained humble, saying, "It wasn't me. It was Scout. He just knew." As for Sheriff Ross, the case changed her. It taught her to trust instinct, to never give up, even when leads grow cold. She kept Daniel's drawings in a file labeled Truth Buried and visited the Parker farm once more before it was finally cleared for good. She stood by the old chicken coop, now dismantled and gone, and closed her eyes. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. And for the first time in a decade, the silence on that land didn't feel haunted. It felt healed.